Good evening. Welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Sword. We have a very special guest for later in the show. He's going to be joining us at the end of the show. We have a lot of Braves rumors. Alex Anthopoulos, Brian Snitker. They both took the stand at the winter meetings, had a lot of interesting comments. But I'm going to talk about first a huge story that kind of broke late last night from Justin Toscano of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, saying that he has a source familiar with the situation about Max Fried and his contract extension talks with the Braves, which he said they have had. They exchanged numbers. They reached an impasse, and they are not currently ongoing. Now, Toscano hasn't been around the beat for very long, hasn't broken a lot of news. I have no reason to believe that he would just break something without having a very notable source. I don't know who that source is, obviously, or I would be reporting this information. So take it for what it's worth. He's never really broken any news like this. But listen, I think it makes a lot of sense. We haven't heard anything from any other insiders that negotiations are ongoing. Now, I'm not necessarily surprised by that. When it comes to extensions, we generally hear nothing. But I think this is what a lot of Braves fans expected when it comes to these talks with Max Fried. We watched Freddie Freeman, obviously, first, then Dansby Swanson. And I think everyone's kind of been waiting for this to end in a very similar yet unfortunate way.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and write this home. This is just a feeling. Obviously, we've watched the Braves do this two times now with Freddie Freeman and Dansby Swanson. Terry McGuirk has come out and said that, free agency there's not a lot of value in it because you're competing with each other. That's not how the Braves have operated thus far. And Braves fans shouldn't expect it to change. In fact, they should expect them to do exactly what they've done and let Max Fried walk. I imagine that Anthopoulos and company threw out a number that they thought was fair. Obviously, Fried's representatives think that, he can get more on the open market, and they're absolutely right. Somebody's going to pay Max Fried 7-8 years, $200+ million because he's a lefty. He's a bulldog. There's no reason for the Braves or Braves fans to get their hopes up that an extension is going to get done because we've seen this song and dance before.
Yeah, there's a few things I want to say, and one is positive and one is negative that I think these negotiations could pick back up or whether it happens at the end of the year that he could remain a Brave. And that is what we've seen from the Braves this offseason. They offered a guy like Aaron Nola, who hasn't been nearly as productive as Max Fried, at least over the regular season, a 6-year, $162 million contract at about the same age. If they're going to do that, why would they at least not offer the same thing to Max Fried or a little bit more? I mean, I would offer him a little bit more. He's been better. Well, here's the reason why I think an extension is not going to get done, at least until the middle of the season. And by the time the middle of the season comes around, it may be too late because Max Fried's then only a couple months away from free agency. He knows that he's going to get more money in a bidding war in free agency than he would in any extension he's going to sign with the Braves. So he'd probably be settling for a hometown discount. And it is that elbow injury that he suffered this past year that cost him half the season, that a lot of people were worried about. Oh, is it going to be a torn UCL? Fortunately, there was no torn UCL or UCL damage, but that would have been his second Tommy John surgery. There still was no, at least as far as we heard, there was no this is why he was injured. It was this injury, it was that. And when you see elbow discomfort and then he comes back, he pitches pretty well for as much time as he had off. But I still think there's got to be some, semblance of hesitancy in offering him this massive deal when he's coming off an injury that's kind of like a sketchy injury.
Yeah, I think, the writing's just on the wall in my eyes. I think that, we could talk about it, and I'm more than willing to talk about it. But my answer, my thoughts, my takes are not going to change. He's going to walk this offseason. He's going to get $200+ million. And that is all, if he's healthy. Obviously, injuries cloud everything from negotiations currently to future negotiations and into free agency. Injuries are going to cloud everything. Now, obviously, if he runs into another injury, everybody's going to wish they had gotten a deal done sooner on Max Fried's side. But the fact of the matter is like, who are Braves fans kidding? And I don't want to be a wet blanket. I try to be as optimistic as I possibly can, regardless of the sport, regardless of the situation. I tend to think that's just a better way to look at your life. But this is wet blanket stuff through and through. We've seen the same song and dance. I'm going to continue to say that. We watched Dansby Swanson walk. We watched Freddie Freeman walk. Anthopoulos, I imagine, gave Max Fried's representatives the best number he probably could. Maybe there's a little wiggle room, but I doubt Anthopoulos is going and playing hardball with a guy like Max Fried, who we built this entire rebuild around. And is, like you have mentioned, he's pretty much the only pitcher who's stuck around, whether it be injuries, trades, or just realizing his full potential. So it's not like Alex Anthopoulos and company is going to lowball Max Fried. It's not like they're offering $100 million. I seriously doubt that. I imagine it's a more than fair deal. We know the reported Dansby Swanson offer. We know the reported Freddie Freeman offer, and those were fine deals. The fact of the matter is some desperate team who wants a southpaw starter with plenty of experience is going to cough up a fortune. And the Braves don't operate like that. They're not going to go out of their comfort zone for Freddie Freeman, Dansby Swanson, and they're certainly not going to do it for Max Fried.
Yeah, I would go out there and bet that the offer was somewhere around 6 years, $150 million. I think that's probably where they cut it off. That's what Carlos Rodon got last year. Obviously, Rodon was coming off this unbelievable season. Then he battles injuries, and it was just absolutely awful for the Yankees in the first year of his deal. And now that deal looks absolutely awful. Maybe they even lowballed him off of that. If I'm Max Fried, I'm not having any of it. And especially if I'm Max Fried and I'm feeling healthy again, I'm not having any of it, because it's going to be a 7 or 8 year deal. If he comes out, if he stays healthy next year, it's going to be a 7 or 8 year deal. It's going to be more than Rodon was. He's better than Rodon. He's been more consistent than Rodon for longer. And obviously I think there's also some issues just beyond the elbow injury and the concern there potentially being a longer term deal and something that could affect him this next season and beyond in his career is the playoff numbers. I mean, the playoff numbers, let's not beat around the bush with Max Fried. I mean, outside of that one Game 6 where he clinched the World Series for the Braves, have been pretty piss poor. I mean, you look at a guy like Aaron Nola, what he's done the last 2 postseasons, maybe that was a little more attractive to the Braves, because obviously we've talked about it time and time again. What this team really needs is guys that are going to produce effectively in the postseason, because they have enough talent to win just on the backs of their offense. They need guys that are like a Madison Bumgarner. Yes, he wasn't the greatest. No, he wasn't going to win a Cy Young, but push come to shove in the postseason, was there anybody than prime Madison Bumgarner that you want on the mound? I mean, even look at Ian Anderson. I mean, that guy, average pitcher. Lights come on in the postseason. Guys, one of the best postseason pitchers. If you look at win probability added, he pitched like 4 times. He's up there. Like he's one of the best pitchers in the postseason history, which is kind of incredible given how young he is. But I mean, that's another thing that the Braves have to consider. I will say one last thing in terms, eventually the Braves are going to have to take a risk. We saw them potentially do one with Aaron Nola. But if they're going to get a frontline starter, whether it's this offseason, next offseason, 3 off seasons down the road via trade or the free agent market, they're going to have to take a risk because they don't have that many pitchers that, like, maybe AJ Smith-Shawver, maybe Hurston Waldrop turn into a frontline guy, but it's more likely than not that they don't. So eventually with Morton, Fried gone, like, they're going to have to take a risk somewhere. Is there anyone better to do it on than Max Fried? I'm not sure there is.
Well, yeah, and I want to go back to the postseason success or lack thereof. 2 years ago he was sick. And then this past year, he was dealing with injury and had not much time at all to get back in the swing of things. But those are the concerns. Obviously, the flu thing, I guess you can't really help. I mean, people get sick. But in terms of this past year, like you said, the injuries are a concern, whereas, Nola's been an absolute workhorse. Just knowing that your guy's going to be there and be healthy, even if he is maybe a little less productive in the regular season, is probably worth it. And, I don't know if the risk thing is really, a fair thing to say, because look, they gave Spencer Strider, which is a fair amount of risk, giving him all that guaranteed money. That's a fair amount of risk, in my opinion. You locked up at least one frontline starter, and, maybe Hurston Waldrop and AJ Smith-Shawver turn into those guys one day. I wouldn't hold my breath, because as we've seen, prospects, injuries, realizing their full potential, it's few and far between. Spencer Strider is not the norm. Typically, he's, not the norm. So I don't know where you go in terms of the risk calculation, because free agents, there's no value in free agents unless you lock them up early. And maybe that's what you're speaking to, is the risk that maybe they realize their full potential, or at least, give you in dollars and cents value wise. But there's just, in terms of Terry McGuirk and what his comments have been in the past, I just have a hard time believing Alex Anthopoulos is ever going to get into a bidding war with a free agent I think we've seen his MO, and I don't think he's going to change it. And it's going to, be acquiring a frontline starter via trade. That's the only path I see forward, really. And it's not going to be Max Fried. It's not going to be.
Thing. He hasn't done that either. Like, he's literally not taking a risk. And frontline starters, just like they are on the free agent market, cost more than getting a Matt Olson, but significantly more. It's significantly more. It's much more difficult. Everybody is looking for starting pitching. You probably had 3 teams looking for a guy like Matt Olson that were willing to give up those kind of prospects. It's way more difficult. They haven't taken a risk in any sense to acquire a legitimate, not frontline, even a middle of the rotation guy. They haven't taken any risk, and they're going to have to do it. Like, it has to happen. They have to fill some of these spots. It has to happen eventually. We've seen them kind of do it with Aaron Nola if the reports are true, but eventually it has to happen. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but he's going to have to change up that MO, especially in the middle of this championship window. I want to talk about another thing about Max Fried. Is there any chance that he's traded before next season?